Today we are trying something a little new. I know the subject matter of this episode is going to be a little bit more deep, and I wanted that to be the case because I really wanted to have like a connection with the people who can really relate to this in any sort of way that they will. I decided the best way to do this episode would be if I wrote down what I wanted to say in like a kind of like a passage, like in a way that it would be like in a storytelling sense, because I feel like it's the best way to really get my thoughts out there. So I'm about to read my passage, and then afterwards I'll talk a little bit about it and what made me decide to have this as the subject matter for this week's episode. Do I have a drinking problem? After time and time again in my life, I've always had to ask myself this question to essentially check myself to make sure that I don't end up like some of my ancestors. I always remember my mother talking about some of her side of the family abusing substances, and thankfully she never wanted anything to do with that because she saw how terrible it affected the closest people around her. When it comes to my father, he stopped drinking around 10 years ago because he realized it was negatively affecting aspects of his life, more specifically, our relationship. Although I have so much gratitude and feel so blessed to have a father who finally acknowledged the strain he was causing, I still ended up seeing him in a way that made me realize I never want to become a person who negatively impacts someone who is close to me because of alcohol. So, for the first 12-ish years of my life, I saw how damaging alcohol can be firsthand, and because of it, I wanted nothing to do with alcohol. And then in the next 4 or 5 years, I started to have a happier and stronger relationship with my father. But during that time, I went to multiple high school parties where people were drinking and having a lot of fun. Even though no one ever pressured me to have a drink, the thought of maybe it's possible to actually have fun and not mess up my life was intriguing to me. I know that was a very naive way to look at it, but I was 17, cut me some slack, alright? I had my first alcoholic drink and it tasted fucking awful. Oh yeah. Did I mention my first drink was a vodka Dr. Pepper? I gagged, and because of my hatred for throwing up, I somehow convinced myself that I was fine. I had a couple of more drinks, better drinks, and I finally felt it. I was drunk. I was drunk for the first time in my life, and it actually felt good, and I was even told that I was so much fun, so I got invited to more parties. At least for the next year, I was at every birthday party, holiday party, graduation party, even got invited to a few family gatherings. But one day, I drove to a party and decided not to drink, and honestly, it felt a bit strange. I felt awkward. I felt like less people were talking to me than normal. I sat on the sofa scrolling on my phone because I would get irritated when someone would come up to me being so drunk, and then they would get irritated with me for being irritated with them. I genuinely just didn't have any fun, and then it dawned on me. Do people not enjoy my presence unless I had a few drinks on me? Do I even like me when I'm sober? I know that might be dramatic, lost a whole friend group, and a lot of my other friends went away for college, which made me feel disconnected from them and isolated. So I became very insecure with who I was because I felt like nobody wanted to be my friend. During this, I spiraled and internally kept asking that question for a couple of weeks until the next party I was invited to from new friends I made at work. It was the first time I hung out with them outside of work, and I really wanted them to like me, and this time, to prevent myself from feeling like I did last time, I got drunk. And I got drunk every time because I am only fun and cool when I'm drinking, not when I'm sober. Throughout the next couple of months, I became closer with my coworkers and made me realize that they even liked me without drinking. But I went to parties, I always got drunk because there were always new people, which meant there were more people to potentially not enjoy my presence if I was sober. Because of this massive insecurity, I developed what's called anxiety, which means that I get really bad anxiety the day after for a multitude of reasons. But this didn't prevent me from getting drunk the next time because I cannot take the risk of feeling like no one enjoys my presence. At this point, some old high school friends and I reconnected, and they invited me up to a little gathering, but even though it was a small gathering, I of course needed to be fun and cool so they would want to be my friend. And if they became my friend, it would mean they enjoyed my presence and distract me from not liking myself overall. But something happened where we were getting deep, but I was scared to share any real feelings I've been having, so I went to the bathroom and just broke down. I was there for a while, and my friend came to calm me down and help me to bed. The next morning, for the first time in my life, I asked the question, do I have a drinking problem? After this, I stopped drinking for about 8 months to do some self-reflecting, and thankfully, these new friends didn't hate me and still wanted to hang out with me. This meant everything to me because I was scared if I was authentically myself that no one would want to even be around me, let alone be my friend. It essentially gave me clarity that people like me even when I'm sober, and during this time that meant everything because a path to a better relationship with alcohol began. I was invited to one of their birthday parties where I decided to drink because I felt safe enough, all while being responsible, and I had a great time. This also resulted in no anxiety. Fast forward a couple of years, I was finally 21, and as most people who turn 21 in the United States, I was excited. I was able to go clubbing, bar hopping, and order drinks at restaurants with my dinner. Before this, I was only drinking maybe once or twice a month, but now that I'm 21, it has turned into at least twice a week. I think no one noticed it as an issue because my birthday is at the end of November, which is the holiday season, and most of January people are home from college, so it was an easy excuse to always get a drink. It maybe would be okay if during this time I wasn't going through some family and more insecurity issues. For one, the family issue was pretty intense and skyrocketed my anxiety to an all-time high. My insecurity issues was me feeling lost and behind in life because it was the same year all my high school classmates graduated from college. Other friends were getting pregnant, engaged, moving out, and getting their first corporate job. I didn't really feel like I was doing anything with my life, or at least making any progress with it, so I was always looking forward to the next time I had an opportunity to drink, because it made me feel like my problems weren't there anymore. At the same time, I was also working over 40 hours a week because I was planning on going to Mardi Gras that year, which is a festival in New Orleans. This was in the second week of February that year, and when the time came, I visited my friend Ariana. She lives down there for school, and we essentially partied for 6 straight days. It was probably the most fun I've ever had besides this past trip to New Orleans, but 6 days of partying also meant 6 days of drinking, so I went on my first bender, and it didn't stop there. I got home Thursday, but then that Friday and Saturday I had 2 birthday parties, and of course, I drank, which means I went on an 8-day bender. By the 8th day, I felt my body just feel the weakest it's ever felt, and every morning I would wake up with so much anxiety, so thankfully, I told myself that I would take a little bit of a break from drinking. And I did. Until the following weekend. My anxiety was so high with all of life's responsibilities coming at me and with all of my other issues, as soon as someone asked me if I wanted to go out, I immediately said yes. Another issue that was occurring during this time, it was the stress of my other podcast. The podcast was my first podcast and the only one before this one. I co-hosted with my best friend at the time, and it was actually growing quite a bit. It was a comedy podcast combined with society and culture, and we also had a lot of our friends come on it. The reason why I bring this up is because I felt like my relationship with my co-host was no longer a friendship, but more like business partners. I would only get texts about the podcast, and we would only hang out when we were recording episodes. I would bring up the issue to them, and they would just dismiss it. I felt sad because I felt our friendship dwindling. I confided in them with everything, and we were friends since high school. Earlier, I mentioned me breaking down in a bathroom and a friend came to comfort me. This was that friend. I'm saying this because it was another stress that added another reason to my drinking, and to give clarity, we are no longer friends and we don't do the podcast anymore. But there is no hatred, only appreciation for the memories that we made. So to quickly sum it up, during this time I was going through some intense family issues, feeling behind and lost in life, overworking myself at work, stressing of keeping up with the podcast growth, and feeling like me and my best friend weren't going to be close anymore. Those all ended up as excuses on why I was drinking more than I usually was. I bet you're wondering, what made me ask the question, do I have a drinking problem? At the end of March that year, I went to a bar where my friend's band was playing and I got into a bit of drama, and I didn't handle myself that well. The following morning, I got into a massive blow-up fight with one of my managers that almost cost me my job. It didn't, thankfully, because I wasn't in the wrong for the reason why we got into it, but I was written up for the way I handled myself. I thought this was completely fair because I was disappointed in the way that I acted. Would I have handled myself like that if I didn't drink the night before? Would I have had anxiety, the added fuel to the disagreement? Mind you, I was working 13 hours and that happened in the first 15 minutes I was there. The following day, I told all my friends I was going to take a break overall from hanging out, and I took a real break from drinking so I can face all the problems I genuinely was dealing with. Facing it was extremely hard because I was drowning myself in alcohol for a while, so for the first week of me taking this break, I just sobbed my eyes out every day. I realized that I hated my life. I was miserable. I opened up to my mom and I told her I think I'm depressed. and she was actually supportive and reassured that she will always be there for me and loved me. I was a bit shocked because in the past she would say something like, pray it away and God would help. But this time I think she knew there was something more intense and even supported the decision with me getting a therapist. Thank God I got one because it was absolutely necessary in order to grow and escape the darkness I was trapped in. Or at least I felt I was trapped in. In therapy, I had a lot of realizations, and one of the realizations was I'm not an alcoholic, but I need to learn how to not use alcohol as a way to cope because that means I have a big drinking problem. I didn't drink for about 3 months, and then summer came around, and I was much happier, and I was making decisions that were advancing my life in all different ways. I decided to have a drink at a party. I know a lot of people would have made the decision of not drinking again, but me and my therapist discussed that it's actually pretty normal to figure out how to have a healthy relationship with alcohol when you're young. We also discussed I should only be drinking if I'm in a good headspace, which I was that summer. After that summer, I did the 75 Heart Fitness Challenge, which required me to pick a diet excluding alcohol. It was completely easy to stop drinking, and I still went out to parties and bars with my friends and had loads of fun. It made me realize I have grown and have self-restraint to not drink whenever I wanted and manage to still have fun. Sometimes I choose to be sober and be the DD for my friends and still have a blast. Even though these 2 moments have been pretty dark, it has made me grow tremendously, and I'm extremely proud that I have had a healthy relationship with alcohol ever since. I learned that I don't need alcohol for people to like me, and I shouldn't be using alcohol to cope. I also learned that I can say no to alcohol with ease and not have any guilt or fear from doing so. Okay. So, I know that was pretty deep, but I felt like the best way to really talk about this was to write down my thoughts and just read it off. I bet you're wondering why I'm bringing this up now. And it's because I went to Mardi Gras again, and I had like a 7-day bender. And even though I had a lot of fun after the bender, when I got home, I asked myself the question again. So this is now the 3rd time in my life where I ask myself, do I have a drinking problem? And I don't. Thankfully, I've worked really hard on myself and I've grown a lot to have a really healthy relationship with alcohol. And when I got home, I asked myself the question, right? And then I was just asking myself more questions to get a good answer if I did. So in order for myself to really get a good answer of do I have a drinking problem, I asked myself a couple of questions. Am I overspending money on drinks? Am I drinking so I can look cool? Am I drinking so I can avoid any problems? Am I drinking and causing problems? You know, I was in a very safe space the entire time. And when I went down to Mardi Gras, everyone was doing the same thing. And I'm not saying that I had to do the same thing because of that. I wanted to. And it wasn't a lot of pressure. It was no pressure, but I wasn't putting a lot of pressure on myself. If I wanted to drink or grab a drink, I did. And there was a lot of times where people started drinking a lot earlier in the day, and I was like, I'm just gonna wait until night. And I did. You know, like I have that self-restraint still, and I'm really happy about that. So I feel like I will always go back to that question whenever I feel like I've been drinking a little bit more than usual because I just have that kind of trauma, I guess. You know, I've dealt with that a lot of my life, and I've seen really poor results from it. I've seen it from my family, I've seen it from my friend's family, and I think that sometimes I overthink it, you know, and it's a really bad feeling. But as soon as like I'm drinking and I actually get that feeling because I start overthinking about that specific a scenario of me falling into that bad habit again, I stop drinking because I need to make sure that I'm good, in a good headspace, and I'm in a safe place where I'm able to drink without falling into like sadness, you know? And I think a lot of my generation, we've grown up with a lot of PSAs about how damaging alcohol can be, right? But I think that we've also grown with the internet. So we've seen both sides, you know. We've seen people having a lot of fun um, with drinking, and a lot of people ruin their lives with drinking. And I think that a lot of people just don't realize when you are finally 21 and it's becoming a little bit more casual to have a drink. I think a lot of people don't understand that it's normal to figure out your relationship with drinking because it can lead to something really, really terrible. You know what I mean? There's a couple of friends who just don't drink anymore because they know it's just not good for them, and they don't drink. You know, they've had a situation where it just went too far, so they just will never drink again, which is amazing for them, and I'm so happy for them. But I figured out that I do have the self restraint to, you know, say no to a drink. And I'm also feel like I've worked on myself so much where I became very secure in myself, and I wasn't, as you can tell by these two past moments. Um, you know, and looking back at it, it just makes me so proud to to hear all those, and not to hear, I guess to hear, but to realize that I was in those dark moments and I have a lot more control over myself and in my life, and I'm so much happier. So if I were to give advice to these past two Marios, these 21-year-old Mario and I believe 19-year-old Mario. Speaking of 19, I think that's also really normal. I think a lot of people can like fall into like to have a drinking problem or alcoholism or substance abuse when they're so young because they get introduced to it so young. So you just have to figure it out. You know what I mean? You have to have a good mindset. You have to be happy. You have to have good support. You have to be in a safe location. You know, there's different things. And if those three things aren't all positive, then maybe you should just reevaluate it and be like, hey, I'm just not gonna drink this time. You know, and that's okay. And I think that if you can have fun without drinking and like there's other people drinking, I think that's another thing, you know what I mean? I think there's a lot of other people that have like FOMO, so they kind of like get irritated and they just don't want to even be there or even have the patience to handle that. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed this new format that I tried out. And I think that it came out pretty good. I hope you enjoyed. Um, I know it's really deep, but one of the biggest things in that wanted when I started this podcast was that I'm using this as a video diary, a video and audio diary, and I felt like the past couple of episodes were like they were check-ins for sure, but I feel like you would be able to get more substance and have more content like that you guys would enjoy listening to if I just wrote it down, you know, if I got all my thoughts down and it came from the heart. And I hope that it came across like that. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. My name is Mario Rodriguez. You can follow me on any of the platforms on MR.talks. You can watch me on YouTube. You can listen to me on Spotify and Apple Podcast. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and until I see you next time.